In our tour of the basic qualities of light, we have reached spread or diffusion, how broad or point-like the source of light is. And that is a very important quality that we spend a lot of attention on because it affects the quality of the light very much. This is an example of soft light. And generally we talk about light being soft or hard. Soft light is very diffused. And so it is coming from a wide range of directions. So it does not cast sharp shadows. The shadows seem to gently wrap around the subject. So this photo has a very soft light on it. And if you look, the shadows, there are definitely areas of shadow and brightness, but the transition from brightness to shadow are very subtle, gentle transitions that, it very subtly moves from light to shadow because the source of light is very large and very diffused and very soft. So it's got a very gentle kind of a look to it. And then this is an example of a much harder light, also a shot of a face, but there's a light source which is more of a point source and a hard source. And so the delineation between shadow and brightness is much sharper. So where you see shadows like on the nose and the crease in his forehead, the shadows are more defined and there's more of a sharp edge when you transition from light to shadow. It's a harder transition. Soft and hard light exists everywhere in nature, in man-made sources, in lighting that we do intentionally, and in lighting that just exists. In nature, in an environment where you have fog or overcast, it is about the softest light you can get because the sunlight is diffused evenly over the entire sky, over the entire atmosphere, and it is virtually directionless. There are just no shadows anywhere, and it's just very, very even. It's a really, it's a really interesting, pretty soft, kind of a look. It evokes a certain feeling, This one, not quite as much like that, but still very overcast, very soft. And then you go to a shot like this where the sun is not obscured by clouds and it's hitting some sharp objects and you get these very, very defined, sharp shadows, So this is a hard light. Both sunlight, one coming through fog and one not. These are just light bulbs, but they create a soft light because there's a bunch of them and they're bouncing off the tent and there's a lot of ambient kind of just moonlight. And this, again, is a hard light, it's hard sunlight. Hard shadows there, hard shadows on her face, and another one with fog, and it's virtually shadowless. You've got some areas that are a little darker, but it's very, very subtle. There are shadows, but they almost don't read as shadows. Down under the bush a little bit. And back to hard, and you have bright sun, no clouds, a sharp rock. So you've got these lines that are just like razor sharp, very, very sharp, hard light. So these are the extremes. You can go anywhere in between, and you can vary it, and you can vary it during a shot. While things are moving, you can have it vary.
So these are some examples of soft and hard light in various situations. So what makes a light hard or soft? Well, it all starts with a light source, right? And what happens there is something is emitting photons, a little stream of photons, little particles of light. And the physics gets a little complicated here, but you can think of this as just a solid shaft of light, kind of like a laser beam.
But the thing is, unless you have an actual laser, it doesn't really just come out of one direction. It goes everywhere. And it's not actually a whole bunch of little lasers. It's actually just goes everywhere. There's just this field of light shooting out everywhere. So that's often not all that useful because you want to direct the light. You want to say that there's light here and there's not light over there. So we put them in enclosures and we put barn doors and other kinds of devices around them to channel the light so that it's controlled. When you do that, you end up with an area of light and an area of not light. So, here we have potentially a circle of light that's being controlled when this light source is in a case. Now, if you were to put an object in this light source, in this light beam, interrupting it, it's going to cast a shadow. What you're going to see there is like a hole in the light. You can see a little dark spot, a little shadow cast.
What actually is happening, though, since the light is not a point source like a laser, the light is hitting the object at slightly different angles. So some of the surface receives all of the light, some receives none, but in between you get this penumbra region, which receives light only from the parts of the source that have a direct line to the subject. So you put your object in the light, you'd get a shadow if your light source was a perfect point source. The shadow would look like that. It would have a razor sharp edge. But since the source is broader than a single point, what really happens is those edges
are a little diffused. And so the pattern actually is fuzzy around the edges. Now, the distance between the object that's casting the shadow and the shadow itself, the surface, is critical too, because the further away it is, the more chance this light has to spread out. It's spreading out at a certain angle. So if you move this back, it's just going to keep spreading out and keep spreading out and keep spreading out. So if I put this back this far, it's spread out that much. And so the border of this circle is a certain amount of fuzziness. And so this light is softer than that razor hard light. It's a little bit soft because it's diffused at the edges. If I move this thing way back here, this light continues to spread at the same angle. So now it's spread out over the whole paper. So now your circle is very fuzzy. And now that's a very soft light. So by moving the object that's casting the shadow away from the surface, we softened the light. And we can show you that in an actual object over here.
So you see the little shadow. You see the shadow's sharp, right? And as I move it away, you tell what's happening? It look like my diagram, kind of. Further it gets from the subject, the more the light is bending around the edges of this object, and you're getting a softer and softer, more diffused shadow. So, looks good on a diagram, but it works in real life too. And I put that piece of the business part up there to illustrate that the camera is in fact in focus.
So we've got the light and we've got the object creating the shadow, creating a circle of shadow on the surface. What would happen if you were to add a second light source, right? Now you've got two beams of light converging on the surface. What you would, instead of your circle of light, you now have two circles of light. And where they intersect, they're going to be brighter. And then where they're not intersecting, they're not as bright. Now, if you were to put an object into that dual beam, what you'd see is that you'd get two shadows offset. So one of them would be going this way and one of them would be going that way. And the shadows would overlap, which would give you two overlapping circles. And they would be darker where the shadows overlap. So you'd have a lighter shadow on the outsides and a darker shadow in the middle, which kind of look like that. It would go from all the way bright to a little bit darker to a lot darker, and then back to a little bit darker to all the way bright. Remember, when we started to diffuse the edge, how it started to gradually go from dark to light. When we showed the photos, how they gradually went to dark. We're beginning to gradiate instead of a line from dark to light. We're beginning, now this is only 2 steps of gradation, but we're beginning to have a graduated change from light to dark. So let's go look at that.
So I'm going to turn on a little flashlight here. And you have a shadow. And it looks kind of like a pretty hard shadow because it's close. So it's pretty hard. And again, it's a little bit diffused. And that's why I put that card up there, because it almost looks like the shadow's out of focus, like camera's out of focus, but it's not. It's just because it's a little bit diffused. So if I have a second light, I have 2 shadows. And you can see at the top and the bottom of the lighter section, that's where you're only getting a shadow from one light. And in the middle, they're overlapping, and so it's darker. About a third light, and you get 3 shadows. And you get very light, where there's only one, and then a little bit darker, where 2 of them are overlapping, and then even darker, where 3 of them are overlapping. What you have is a soft light, like this. You just made a soft light. You've got a gradual change from light to dark. It's not very gradual, because you only got these 3-point sources. But it is jumping, from a little bit of shadow to more shadow to more shadow. And that's how you get a soft light, is you spread out from 1 flashlight to 3 flashlights to more flashlights to more flashlights. And the wider that source gets, the softer the thing gets. So if you take, for example, this thing, look at all those lights. Now I've got a whole bunch of little light bulbs, right? Well, that's going to start looking like so many little shadows that unless you get a microscope, you're not really going to see them. Unless the thing's like a tenth of a millimeter away, it's just going to start looking like one continuous shadow. And then if you diffuse it, if you take that box and put it back on the front of there, it's going to completely wipe it out, because just like moving the source away made it even softer, when you put something like that on there that scatters the light, the shadows are completely gone. So in effect, when you put this on there, instead of being a little tiny dot of a light, this whole thing is now the light, basically. So now you've got something that's much larger. So it's going to wrap around much better.
As we've seen in previous segments, the larger the area of a light source is, the softer the light hitting the subject. Now let's look at how the distance of the light from the subject affects softness.
If you remember squishing your head, hold your finger up and tell me how big this phone looks to you. Hold your fingers to the size of the phone. Okay. Just hold it like that. Okay. Now I want you to do the same thing, but I'm going to move. How much does that Galaxy? The phone's the same size. Difference is how far away it is, right?
No way.
That's squishing your head, right? So if I take this light and I move it further away from her, it's basically going to appear to, it's hard for what the light's doing to her face. It's going to appear as if the light itself is getting smaller, and it's going to act like a smaller light. Right. So if you're right. So if you look at the shadow, or notice, and this is a pretty soft light from this distance. You see how it's kind of wrapping around? So I'm going to change the brightness just because It's so far away, it's not doing much. And now look at it. You know, same kind of angle, same light source. You see how it's a hard light now? But I think there it changes the distance because just like with the phone, to her perspective, the light seems like a much smaller thing. So, you know, the apparent size of the light source, not really the actual size of the light source, but the size of the light source relative to the subject is what's determining whether it's soft or not. So how do you make it soft? There's a lot of different ways. So phthalates have a spot to let on. That makes the light smaller spot, a larger. So it's spreading the light out for its focus there, it's concentrating it in. It's not a real dramatic change, but it also does change the softness. So I think you can see that's like a little bit harder, a shadow there. And as you do that, it's kind of spreading it out. Spot and flood on a lighting unit is a control for softness. There are various kinds of diffusers that some lights will have that you put on the front of it, and that will cause it to be more diffuse. I was using a light a couple weeks ago that actually had an electronic device where you could dial it more diffused or less diffused. It's kind of an interesting thing. And they make gel material you can put on front of a light to make it more diffuse. And this is on one of those distance things, right? So it's close, it's in a little bit, right? And then if I bring it further away from the light, it does a lot. That's really soft then. So you're looking at the shadowy area now. That's like a really diffused kind of thing. These soft boxes like this is that same kind of diffusion, built into a little unit that just rides on the box. And then there's, various kinds of grip gear that you have. This is a silk. These come in different sizes, and they just mount on a stand like that. And you put them out in front of light sources. You can put them out just in front of sunlight or anything, to break up light sources and make them softer. And then there's frames that is the same kind of material as silk material that can get very large. They make them that are 6 feet by 6 feet, and you stretch something out over a hard metal frame. And there's ones that are 12 feet by 12 feet, and there's ones that are 20 feet by 20 feet. And, they for something that big, it gets labor intensive, and, you end up needing crew. But if you go out, we were working on the back lot in Wilmington, a city street, kind of a movie set, and they don't want, they want consistent light, and they don't want the harsh sunlight coming down in the middle of the day. So they took those 20 by 20 silks and put them between the buildings and just make like a soft, roof over the whole city, more or less, and then you've got this nice soft diffused sunlight coming in all the time.
And bounce is a great technique. It's simple, but it's very effective way of softening a light. So if I take this light and I put it directly on Takari, let's see. You'll see that it's going to be a pretty hard light. Yeah, so you get some very sharp shadows, right? So I can take the exact same light, and instead of using this light as the light source, I've got this 4 foot by 8 foot piece of foam core, which acts like a gigantic light, basically. So as we saw before, when the light source gets wider, it's softer, right? So now, when I put this in as the light source, now why is it a light source? It's a light source because I'm bouncing the light off of it. So I'm hitting this with that same light, lighting this up, and now we're spreading this light way out and it's bouncing back. Now, of course, when you reflect the light back like that, you lose a lot of it. So I need to turn the brightness up. So I'm going to run the dimmer way up on this thing so I get a lot more light out of it.
And that is one downside of bounce, is you lose light through it. But now, same light, same position, much, much softer effect. And you can bounce with anything, you know. I mean, foam core is great, but you know, you can bounce with anything that's, if it has a tint to it, you'll get that tint in your bounce. If you have something that's got a warm or a cool tint or any color to it. But you know, typically you do something white that's just neutral and has a lot of reflectivity. But you know, it's a very available kind of technique. And another thing, you know, we've got diffusion. This is a gel diffusion. This is a very light gel diffusion called Opal. And you can put this in front of any source to soften it. But you can even add this kind of thing to a bounce and even further soften it. You put some diffusion in there. All right, so now we are outside with Katie, and obviously the sun's extremely hard, direct sunlight right now, so if we come in we'll see, you know, very hard shadows. Right, so how do we soften that? One really simple thing you can do is just bring the person under, you know, a little bit of tree cover, and you know, you get some kind of dappled light. Sometimes that can be soft, or even if it's just broken, a mixture of soft and hard light, it can be a really nice look. So that's potentially a quick thing. If we just spin around, just turn around, Katie. You know, now you've got much more, that's a nice way to deal with sunlight. But you don't have a lot of key light there. So one thing you can do, and it's also fairly soft, you know, you can use a reflector, and there's all kinds of different reflectors. So this is a big 4x4 reflector, but if I take this and spin it in to hit her face, okay, you got those things are super bright, so you got to be careful there. But you know, now I've got her face lit, and still got that nice backlight. So that's actually a pretty nice lighting scheme right there. And then, you know, you also got like smaller reflectors, all kinds of different, you know, sizes and shapes of reflectors. But this is a little, you know, little flex fill collapsible reflector. And can you pan that off so that's off of her? And these things, you know, they're a little more susceptible to wind. You know, they also, you know, so I'm in much closer now, right? Because this has not got as much throw. But, you know, there are various things. And you've also got a white side, which, you know, is going to put a nice soft, that's going to be softer. So talking about soft light, you know, this white side is nice. And you can use that for fill too. Even if you had the big reflector as a key, you could use the little reflector as a fill. So another thing we can do is silk off the sun itself. So Katie, if you can stand in the shadow of that thing. So now we're back to direct sunlight, right? And facing the sun, but we've got this silk here. And so now if you step into the silk, step into the where you were, okay, now we've got a much softer, that's a nice soft light, right? So what we're doing is diffusing the sunlight, and that's nice. And then can you pan that onto her, please? And also if you combine that with your reflector, bring that in, and now your reflector is a backlight. Get it on there. Yeah, there we go. So that's a nice look. You got a nice edge and a nice key light, and you could of course bring the key light so it's not so frontal if you wanted. But you know, so that's a nice technique, is silking off the sun. And silks come in all different sizes. I mean, in the form of flags, you typically have an 18 by 24 inch and a 2 by 3 foot flag version of silk. And then on frames like this one, you know, they come in 4 by 4, which we just call a 4 by, 4 by, 6 by, 8 by, 12 by, 20 by. So, you know, 4 foot, 6 foot, 8 foot, 12 foot, 20 foot, kind of the traditional standard film production grip complement. But other manufacturers make all kinds of gizmos. There are, you know, collapsible frames, and just a variety of different things. You know, there's a flex fill version, you know, and this is that same flex fill we had with the reflector. You know, you've got a silk version of that you could use. And silks come in, this is a full, but they come in full, half, quarter. So you get different levels of diffusion. So, you know, this is a full silk here, and this is a half silk down here. So, well, you can see that, but like, you know, the opacity of that
compared to that. You know, and if you look at the effect of it over here, you can see how much darker it is on the full than the half. You know, and you can see the difference there, going from wherever I'm getting it. There's some full silk, there's some half silk. So it's just less diffused and doesn't cut the light as much. You do lose light through those, which out in the sunlight is not a big deal at all.